Hello everyone and happy Halloween from your friendly neighborhood Seattle Mariners Etsy witch. Haha! I can't actually take credit for the idea for this costume. That came from my husband Sean, but I will take credit for my amazing low budget glitter glue trident Etsy logo and having a witch hat just in my closet just because. So today is Halloween. So happy Halloween if you are celebrating. I'm also filming my second half of October wrap up, plus also wanting to share a couple of the art projects and DIYs and stuff that I have been working on recently. If you are a crafty person yourself, you will know that right around October is when you get really started working on all of your handmade stuff for holiday gifting. So I will not be showing everything that I have worked on, obviously, because some of those are gifts for people that I know watch this channel. So I am not going to spoil the surprise there, but I will share with you some of the other stuff I've made that is not spoilery. So I don't know, how do I want to do this? Maybe we should just switch back and forth between a project and a book and a project and a book. I have a few books to get to today, and one DNF. So I guess we'll start with the DNF and then we'll just kind of go from there. So I DNF'd Play For Me by Libby Hubschiker. It was a romance book that was supposed to be this unlikely pairing between a woman who's a former professional baseball athletic trainer and a guy who's a musician, and they meet at this school where they're both supposed to be teaching. Unfortunately, I had to DNF this book at about 100 pages in, simply because it did one of those things that I really dislike about a lot of contemporary books, which is that it really wore its formulaic nature too on the nose, right? So there's a reason that genres like romance have a lot of familiar tropes that you're used to seeing over and over again. But the thing is, in the hands of a good writer, you kind of don't mind that that's a familiar trope because it's written well and it's handled well and the characters feel fleshed out and like real people. And this book was not that. This was a book that was basically every sort of meme template for Grumpy Sunshine, but actually not a ton of real character development. I found the way that the characters spoke to be kind of inauthentic in the sense that it's really more how people talk to each other on the internet versus in real life, and I don't really tend to like that in my books either. So unfortunately, gave that a DNF, but we move on. Life goes on. All right, so my next project that I'm going to share with you is baseball related, kind of, I guess, in keeping with that. And I made two little things for the baby that I am expecting this December. I made this little crochet hat that's supposed to look like a baseball. Hopefully it fits her head when she comes out. It seems like it's big newborn size. That'll be fun. And then I also made a little lovey, which is kind of like a blanket with a little stuffed thing on top that is supposed to be a baseball field. So it's got a big baseball on the top, and then the little blanket part of it is a field. I will link all of the patterns that I used down below. These are not things that I came up with myself, so I want to make sure the artists get credit there. But this was made with mostly merino superwash wool that I had, and then some acrylic yarn for the white and the red of the laces. I used just acrylic yarn that I already happened to have. All right, moving right along, we'll go in kind of order from least enjoyable to most enjoyable, I guess. So the next book that I finished this month is The Crescent Moon Tea Room by Stacy Savinsky. This is a book about a group of three sisters, the Quigleys, and they are all witches living in Chicago in the late 19th century. They run this magical tea shop where they use reading tea leaves to tell people's fortunes, and they're paid a visit by this witch council, I guess, that kind of controls the magical community here, saying that it is their job to help a few witches in the community complete their tasks with a capital T. It's basically their entire life's purpose. Or else the council is just going to close down the tea shop no real explanation given. I did not really enjoy my time with this book. I picked it up because I was hoping for something that was going to be a little bit lighthearted and cozy, but I just found it to be very bland overall. It did a few things where I just was like, why? So like, there's 3 sisters. We get point of view chapters from each of them, but they all pretty much read like they are exactly the same person. The setting of this in Chicago in the late 19th century really just seemed more like window dressing than anything else. There was no good reason for this book to be set in the 1870s. It just so happened to be there, but that had no bearing on any of the world building or the plot or anything like that. And I found myself, magic systems in books can be a little bit tricky because you don't want to over-explain everything or have everything completely spelled out. Like, there is a degree of, imagination that goes into accepting magic systems. However, I felt like I never really had a good handle on what the, rules, I guess, or boundaries of the magical abilities in this book were. They were kind of all over the place, and then new things would be introduced at seemingly random times for the sake of moving the plot along that then were never, followed up on or addressed or anything like that. Specifically, I'm thinking around one of the sisters has a plot point where she thinks that, her original, magical specialty is going to be this family divination tea leaf thing. And gradually, as she's, learning more about herself, she discovers that she's actually a word witch. So she's really good at doing magic that has to do with writing and literature and that kind of thing. And that just never really gets addressed or goes anywhere because it's kind of there to advance the plot and then wrap up the story at the end. So I found that to be really frustrating. I also found that, there were certain plot developments, like the sudden announcement that if the 3 sisters didn't help the witches complete their tasks, then they were just going to get their tea shop shut down. That felt like they came out of nowhere and just plot beats were not earned. So I was disappointed in this one. I'm going to pass it on to somebody that, hopefully will get some more enjoyment out of it than I did. But the next craft that I will share, I'm actually going to insert some pictures of next because I crocheted this little garland of ghosts. So we crocheted the ghost garland. It was super fun. I put it together in just a couple of hours in the afternoon. Again, I'll make sure that the pattern's linked down below. I used my white superwash wool and also just hot glued some little buttons that I had lying around on for the eyes because basically all of my decorations this year have been handmade, reused from previous years, or crafted anew. So I've mostly used craft and art supplies that I've had before, like the buttons. A couple things I did buy new, which we'll get into a little bit later. But let's talk about the next book. So the next book I have is Witchcraft, A History in 13 Trials by Marian Gibson. This is a nonfiction book that was my nonfiction book club's pick for the month, and it's basically exactly what it says. This is a fairly straightforward, if dry, frequently history book that is examining the concept of witchcraft, both legally and culturally, and how it evolved over time from what we think of as the stereotypical witch trials, like the mass burning of women in medieval to early modern Europe and then the Americas. And then it follows through with kind of how that definition of witchcraft has evolved and changed over time to different case studies from different periods. So we have this early 18th century French case study. We have a story of British colonial violence in Basotho land in the southern part of Africa. We have the trial of Stormy Daniels, which, if you're watching this, we've all lived through that. Oh boy. But I, again, was kind of let down by this book simply because, for one thing, it was written in a very dry and detached style, and I don't think that served it well as a work of popular nonfiction. And I also think that the chapters of the book were really too disjointed and episodic. I think especially if this is, being written by a historian, but as a work of popular nonfiction, that the book would have been better served if she had spent some more time developing, like, what is the story, what is the overall thesis, what is the arc of this book, kind of showing the way in which the trials are connected all together. And she kind of does that, but it is mostly left up to the reader to make those connections. And it isn't always clear, like, what the thesis of it is meant to be. At the very end, there's a very short conclusion that kind of tries to wrap things up with a bulleted list that just is like, so who gets to count as a witch now? And there's literally a bulleted list of basically naming off different marginalizations. So it was okay. I'd recommend it if you're interested in the subject matter, but I'm not necessarily gonna recommend it based off of the quality of the writing. All right, so getting ahead of this sort of like next book that we're going to share, the next craft that I'm going to share is actually something that I made out of a lot of different foraged materials. So Sean and I went for a walk in the woods and collected a bunch of leaves and acorns, and we have these little like leaf garlands that I made and a bunch of little acorn people. These were super fun. This is like one of the few things that I went out and bought new craft supplies for. I bought the pipe cleaners and I bought more glue sticks for my hot glue gun. But yeah, basically it was made out of just the foraged materials and craft supplies I already had, like the twine and the googly eyes. And the acorn people's faces I painted on with my little Posca markers. They are, I think, my favorite thing that I have made. All right, so next up we have a graphic novel. This is Simplicity by Maddie Lubchansky. This is a very queer, very trans graphic novel about a trans man named Lucius who is living in a not so distant future after the collapse of the United States, and he is kind of an anthropology researcher that wants to go out to visit this like spiritual commune in the woods of what used to be upstate New York to try and like study the community out there. This has a little bit of the sort of like weird magic type stuff that I remember from Boys Weekend. There is like some supernatural things in here. There's also a critique of the way that like corporations want to buy up all of these sort of things that start out as very high-minded political projects and how those kinds of things get corrupted by like capitalism's infiltration over time. Unfortunately, I don't think that like all of the elements of the story really hung together very much, particularly the supernatural elements. Again, it's not that everything that's magical has to be explained, but it's kind of unclear what the point of including the supernatural creatures is. Where I think this book really succeeded was in its depiction of the kind of conflicts that can happen within utopian communities or within leftist organizing spaces. I think that was great. I also, of course, love the portrayal of like queer and trans romantic love and sexuality and the sort of imagined communities made real that this book is examining. Of course, I really enjoy Maddie Lubchansky's artwork a lot, and the visual storytelling in this is great. I just think that the plot itself was a little bit weak, but I still really enjoyed this book. All right, so our next book is going to be kind of a book that deals with private school and stuff like that. And since I did go to a Catholic school for the first several years of my education, private school always makes me think of those like little Peter Pan collars. That is not why I made what I am about to show you, but I made them nonetheless. I had been looking at, actually it's funny, another YouTuber whose name is also Anna Goldberg, who has done a lot of crochet collars over the years, and I had just a couple like tiny skeins that I needed to finish up, and I was trying to think of what I could make with them, so I decided to make some collars to basically act as like scarves that can go over a sweater or a long sleeve shirt. So this first one here I made out of some brown alpaca wool that I was gifted when I was staying on a farm in upstate New York. It was an alpaca farm, like a fiber farm, run by a couple who were retired teachers. I stayed with them and camped out on their property for a while, and they were very kind to gift this to me. So I needed a project that could use the small amount of yarn that I had. This one is really toasty. It's not quite cold enough to wear that every day. This one is a little bit more dainty and fine. It's made with some fingering wool and rayon blend here. This is the the one that I had to dye with, but I had to set the dye with apple cider vinegar, because as I was crocheting, the dye was starting to come off and like stain my hands green. I honestly don't remember that happening when I did my first project with this yarn. That was truly bizarre, but that was also like in the middle of COVID when I first bought this yarn, so maybe it was doing that and I just don't remember. But yeah, this one definitely probably more so for just accessorization and looking cool than keeping me super warm. And then last but not least, I had this, it was just like a big twist that I had gotten for a project a little while ago, and I decided to make it into this sort of Christmassy, but I also think looks a little bit like watermelon little collar here, and then the little ties are little rosettes that I crocheted as well. So each of these took me, I don't know, maybe like a couple days to make. I wasn't working on them super dedicatedly, but there you have it. And the book that I'm going to tell you about related to the Peter Pan collars is The Grimoire Grammar School Parent-Teacher Association by Caitlin Rozakis. This is a book that I also bought because I really wanted to read something that was cozy and lighthearted and a little bit fun, because the world has been very heavy and I am absolutely not above using literature for escapism. I freaking loved this book. Was it perfect? No. Was it delightful? Yes. Would I recommend it? Yes, wholeheartedly. So this is the story of Vivian, who is Aria's mom. Aria is a young girl who's like kindergarten age that gets bitten by a werewolf by accident, and because of this and the sort of adjustment that this brings to their entire family, she goes to enroll in this like private school that's in a magical community with other people who are like magic users or magical creatures type things. Because, you know, they're kind of outsiders to the magical community, since Aria wasn't born into a werewolf family. She became a werewolf by accident. They really start to feel a lot like outsiders. They feel like they're trying really hard to give their kid the best chance at life that she can get, but she's having trouble adjusting. There's definitely a lot of like metaphors for the werewolf stuff, as honestly kind of being analogous to maybe neurodivergence. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, but you know, as a teacher, this is kind of what I'm picking up on here in this book. And Vivian, in an attempt to try and like make some friends and start her life over, joins the PTA. There's a whole lot of like PTA parent drama that honestly makes high school look a little bit like a walk in the park. But Vivian starts to notice some suspicious accounting going on, basically, in terms of the money that the PTA has been raising for the school. So not only is she trying to navigate this social minefield here and figure out how to raise her daughter in this new environment, she's also caught up in kind of this web of intrigue and mystery. This book was so cute. It was perfectly cozy. It had some really good plot points about friendship and family and belonging. I am definitely holding on to this copy. I think I'm going to reread it for fun, just whenever I need, like, basically the bookish equivalent of my cozy hot chocolate. All right, I will show you now my final craft, and then we will do the last 3 books all together. So my final craft I made with the same yarn that I made the like Christmas watermelon collar, and this is supposed to be a little beret. Now, this one was interesting. I got it as a free pattern on Ravelry, and I had never made something by this designer before, but it seems like the original pattern was in Japanese and then translated to English. So I'm partially wondering if that's kind of why this didn't turn out the way that I thought it would. I used the correct yarn, hook size, gauge, everything. It just turned out looking a little small. And in the example photo, the designer showed something that looked like it was made with more of a bulky or a worsted weight. So this is like a very tiny beret on my head. And I don't really have like a really big or a small head. It's just a fairly average sized head with a lot of hair. But I'm wondering if I had made this with a bulkier yarn, it would have a little bit more of that loose beret look that it did. Either way, I still think it's kind of cute. It's just not really going to keep my ears warm. So it's kind of, am I just going to wear this so that it looks cute? I'm probably not going to wear this for warmth specifically, which is a bit of a disappointment, but I did like the pattern. It was really interesting making it with this sort of like, not ribbed, but like ridged texture around the brim of the hat. And I think I would want to go back and make it again in a heavier weight yarn just to see what happens. Speaking of just to see what happens, I mean, not really, but I also continued on with my like reread of the Bunnicula series. So I read the original as a kid and then reread it last year. I did not realize that it was part of a wider series, but I had gotten a couple of the other books in the series as part of like a lot on eBay. And so this month I read Nighty Nightmare and Bunnicula Meets Edgar Allan Crow. Both of these were really adorable. In Nighty Nightmare, the Monroes go on a camping trip where they meet a mysterious pair of like cousins and their dog who is named Dog, and the sort of household animals of Chester, Harold, and Howie become convinced that these people are vampires and they're the ones that brought Bunnicula and family to the New World. So there's a lot of hijinks that ensue. It was quite fun. And Bunnicula Meets Edgar Allan Crow was pretty adorable. One of the Monroe children wins a writing competition at school where he gets to write about his favorite author. And because he wins, the favorite author, who goes by the pen name of M.T. Graves, gets to come to the school and like just talk to the kids about what it's like to be a professional author. The author's pet is Edgar Allan Crow, who is part of the title of the book, and the guy is acting a little bit strangely and suspiciously and in just a very gothic manner. So of course the household pets have to figure out how they're going to like investigate all of this and figure out what's going on. This one was very sweet. I'm again like continually impressed at the quality of these books and how well they hold up. They're those great types of children's books that like are well written enough that they can also be read and enjoyed by adults. And I just think that that's such a good mark of quality, right? Like it's written for a child audience, but the author, James Howe, has said that, you know, he writes the kind of books that he'd be interested in and he'd want to read and that he hopes that kids will like. So I just think that that's the way to go, truly. There was a really great like blog post that was partially an essay, partially a Q&A on his website that I'm going to link in the description box down below. I found it really moving. Didn't realize that like he is yet another one of the beloved children's book authors that was gay. Didn't know that as a kid. That's really interesting, like growing up and figuring out like how many more just like queer artists there are making amazing art that's affecting kids' lives for the better. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing. And I love the way that he wrote about it on his website, so please check that out. It's not part of the book, but he did kind of write the essay as part of a Bunnicula anniversary type thing. Let's remove this hat and return to the witch hat for the final book, which I think is probably my favorite book that I read this month. And that is Dark Renaissance, The Dangerous Times and Fatal Genius of Shakespeare's Greatest Rival by Stephen Greenblatt. This is, of course, a nonfiction book about the life of Christopher Marlowe. We know very scant details about Christopher Marlowe's actual life. So what Greenblatt does in this is honestly such a feat of literary detective work. He combs through receipts of what Marlowe recorded that he ate while he was studying at university. He goes through bills. He goes through the letters left behind by Marlowe's peers to try and like reconstruct a biography of this really enigmatic figure who took the literary world quite by storm, flamed bright as a beacon, and died very young under very suspicious circumstances, possibly related to his work as a spy. The way that this was written made it very difficult for me to put this book down. Like, I read this on a plane while I was traveling to visit family, and I kept having to like pause and take breaks so that I wouldn't go through my entire book on just the plane ride. It was that good. I really enjoyed this. This gave me a lot of useful context for my work doing the like Marlowe project, where once a month I am reading a new Christopher Marlowe play. This kind of showed me like where he would have gotten the education and the interest in certain topics that he deals with in his different plays. And I think that's going to be great in terms of like informing how I choose which ones I'm going to read next and the way I interact with them. Definitely recommend this to everybody, especially if you are interested in the topic or the time period, or you just want to learn more about this really fascinating and intriguing character from our literary history. So that is going to do it for my October wrap-up. I mean, Halloween will be over by the time you see this, but again, I hope that you got all of the good treats and no tricks if you're celebrating. And yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books or what you think about crafts. Let me know if you have been doing any fun DIYs or anything else like that. This is kind of also becoming like my other hobbies are involved channel. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that kind of stuff if you're interested in sharing. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!